The moment of death can be postponed, but never evaded. From the earliest times, humans have regarded life as a preparation for death, and death not as a final ending, but as a transition from one world to another. Today, the rituals of death are performed for the bereaved, but that is new. This moment would traditionally mark the start of a complex preparation of the body for the spirit to journey to the next phase of existence. That ancient confidence has largely disappeared, but could there be an afterlife that somehow continues life as it was on Earth? Join us on a journey of discovery as Reader's Digest's Mysteries of the Unexplained presents Sacred Places and Mystic Spirits. The Earth, which used to be seen as the center and purpose of the universe, now appears as a small haven in an infinite void. The creation of life on Earth, which was always understood as the triumphal moment of divine achievement, is now studied as a mechanical process that can be understood as pure chemistry. Science has given us new ways of seeing the world and made it harder to see beyond it. All our ancestors in every civilization shared a different view. They were certain that this world was part of something beyond matter. This was not a theory to debate. The physical forces of nature were seen as direct evidence of sacred power. Human beings strove to interact with the supernatural and the divine. The shells of their achievements have long outlasted the rituals for which they were constructed. These great buildings were not put up because of a whim or a theory, but because of certainty that they had to be built. In Mesopotamia, spectacular ziggurats. In America, vast temples transfigured the jungle. Deserts were etched with strange symbols and designs. And in Europe, the silent monoliths of Stonehenge were erected. And the standing stones of Karnak were raised. These are not monuments. They are places where the sacred and the material were understood to interact. They were all places that answered the question of death. Journalist and author Graham Hancock has aroused a great deal of controversy by claiming to have discovered keys to understanding these constructions. But it's hard to criticize his basic argument that all show awareness of the same cosmic science.
I think that what we're looking at is architecture connected to a science of immortality. The fundamental obsession of the ancient world was not with this life, but with life after death.
Seeking a pattern forged in stone, a pattern repeated over and over again across the globe, Hancock has explored many of the sacred sites of the ancient world.
All around the world, we have sites made of enormous blocks of stone and incorporating precise alignments. You can go to Stonehenge and find precisely the same alignment with the winter solstice sunrise there. Karnak, Avebury, in Europe. These are all part of a system designed to facilitate the passage of the soul from life into death.
Evidence for this ancient science may exist where it's least expected, even on the borders of New Hampshire and Vermont. The entrance to this apparently ancient stone structure, like Karnak and Stonehenge, is oriented to the path taken by the sun at the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year. According to Hancock, this structure could be one more link in a chain of knowledge that reaches back into the depths of time.
We don't know who built them. We really don't understand how they were built. They don't tell us anything about themselves. We're left to wonder why they were built.
Hancock believes that these monuments contain real science, that they represent actual knowledge, as well as a world of shared belief. And the rituals of ancient people like the Celts and their Druid leaders are clues to their knowledge about the spirit world, where humans go after they've left this life.
They absolutely knew that life was a preparation for death, for the great adventure that lies beyond death, and that there were things, specific things, that had to be done in this life in order to be ready for the life beyond.
Rivers, springs, and lakes were all sacred to the Druids. These places were like doorways between the living and the dead. At these points of passage, they offered gold jewelry, valuable weaponry, and silver chalices to their gods. Nothing was so precious that it could not be sacrificed. In 1984, a window into this vanished world would open. A severed human foot was discovered on the conveyor belt of a peat processing company near the English town of Lindo Moss. It was the first in a series of clues that would lead to an even more startling discovery. Deep within the ancient marshland, the mummified body of a man had lain hidden for 2,000 years. The body became known as the Lindo Man.
It was 12 years ago when I first came to Lindo Moss, the day after a well-preserved human foot had been found at the depot of the peat company who worked this site, just a few hundred yards from where we are now. As the local archaeologist, I've been invited to come out and explore the site the following day. And I walked out to almost where we're standing now, and to my amazement, poking out from near the base of one of these sections was a flap of skin, well-preserved human skin, the body we now know as Lindo Man.
The Lindo Man was uncannily well preserved. His skin was smooth and supple. Even his eyelashes could still be seen.
He had neatly trimmed hair, a neatly trimmed beard, so he obviously took care of his appearance. His fingernails, which we found, were wonderfully smooth. Even under the microscope, they looked smooth.
This intimate evidence convinced archaeologists he was a man of the highest rank. But what had brought him to such a fate?
Above the ligature mark,
A forensic pathologist mapped the final moments of Lindo Man's life. It was a remarkable sequence of events, one that ended in human sacrifice.
Well, it looks like a cutting wound rather than something which has been produced after death.
Step by step, the sacrificial rites of the Druids have been reconstructed, just as they unfolded 2 millennia ago. The Druids described everything in 3 parts. The world was a threefold repetition. It seems likely that this offering involved 3 forms of death. The victim was taken to a sacred grove in preparation for the 3 ritual stages of Druidic human sacrifice. First, a strong cord of animal sinew was knotted around his neck and tightened. Then came 2 savage blows to the head. Finally, a knife was used to sever an artery in his neck. He
may have been a princely figure, a warrior, or he may have been a prisoner of war who had been kept for this purpose. But it could easily be someone who went willingly. The Celts believed in reincarnation. Death to them was not such an obstacle as it is to us. So perhaps for the benefit of the tribe, this person went willingly to be sacrificed.
Most of us are not so certain of life after death. We do not speak as people used to do of consulting the spirits of our ancestors. But there are plenty of people who describe the shock of being confronted by the dead. The trouble is, ghosts have no place in our reality. So what is in room 10 of the Bell Hotel in Norfolk? In the last century, the town was shocked by the murder of the owner, Elizabeth Radcliffe. She was killed by her lover, a stable hand, and at the trial that followed, it emerged that he was also her daughter's lover. To everyone's horrified fascination, the girl committed suicide in room 10 of the Bell Hotel. In later years, guests staying at the hotel have reported seeing a young woman's ghost in the room where the suicide occurred. Ancestral spirits were once taken for granted. Now we need proofs. So the Reader's Digest commissioned a special investigation. The leader, Tony Cornell, has for 30 years been a member and investigator with the British Society for Psychical Research. Dr. Judith Coney of London University accompanies him as an observer. And the man who most recently experienced the haunting, Colin Mitchell, provides eyewitness information and precise details.
You could feel the cold spot. It was like ice.
All the way down the corridor?
No, just in one confined space.
Right.
You could literally move in and out.
Right. And then what happened?
And then the door.
A video cameraman records the investigation.
Here we are in room 10.
Okay. This is the room.
This is the room.
Right.
Colin Mitchell spent 3 nights in room number 10. He recalls a rising tempo of paranormal events.
This brass knocker moved on its own.
You could see it.
See it and hear it.
And
yeah. There was an orange...
On that first night, a strange glow appeared in one corner, and the next morning handprints appeared on the interior surface of the plate glass protecting the ancient plaster walls. And in the same corner of the room, the antenna cable of the television appeared to move of its own accord.
That sort of motion. If we move over to the bed, on one of the mornings I had the sensation of the bed being tucked in underneath me.
But it was on his last night that his most remarkable sighting occurred.
2 or 3 times. Right. I woke up one morning and roughly here there was a young girl of around, I'd say, 13 years of age. She was blonde, long white dress, etc.
Standing about here?
Yeah, she stood there, she walked from there across to the front of the table and disappeared. The second time that I actually saw her, she was sitting on the end of the bed. She got up and I felt the bed move as she got up. And this time she was actually looking at me. She walked around again, walked to the table and disappeared again.
Extraordinary.
It's this phantom apparition that Tony Cornell is here to find.
Walked to the table and disappeared again.
Why are so many ghost tales set in old buildings and castles? Do these somehow play the role for us, in imagination or reality, of sacred stones and monuments? Or is it possible that they keep the trace of powerful emotions or the horror of a single moment stored in their fabric? Some people are convinced that ghosts and apparitions are created by violent and terrible events suffered at the moment of death. It's a theory called psychic imprinting. It may explain why ghosts have been reported in so many places around the world. Here, for instance, deep in the Auvergne region of southern France, is the Château de Vos, a place that harbors memories of a love gone tragically awry. In the 16th century, the lord of the chateau seduced a young woman named Lucy. His wife, discovering the adultery, demanded immediate revenge. Lucy was brutally murdered. Baron de la Tour, the present owner, has no doubt that the terrible event still haunts his castle.
The last time that I saw a little light. And after a while, I saw the light in all its power. And I saw within that light the shadow of a human form.
As the Baron walks the empty corridors of his chateau late into the night, it's easy to imagine that Lucy might still be there. Tales of the supernatural are almost commonplace amongst Europe's ancient homes. But certain sites seem overburdened by all the history they've seen. Standing on the border of England and Scotland, Chillingham Castle's 1,000-year history is stained by bloody deeds. And its foundations rest on the ruins of a 7th century abbey that was besieged and pillaged long ago. The monks who did not escape were slaughtered on the spot. The present owner, Sir Humphrey Wakefield, believes that today they walk the North Tower of Chillingham Castle, that their agitated spirits are embedded in its ancient stones and walls.
They'd been cut up and strangled and thrown down wells, their property stolen, and everything else. So you can imagine there were lots of angry spirits floating around from those times.
Those are not the only phantoms rumored to haunt the castle's halls. The terrible grief of a young woman seems to have endured for centuries here. She has become known as the Lady in White.
The White Lady, she was wandering, looking for her husband, one of the earls that controlled this place. Sometimes she'd be seen walking up down the stairs along the passages.
Her husband, according to legend, ran off with a younger sister, the Lady Henrietta Berkeley, and despite her pitiful entreaties, neither sister nor husband would ever set eyes on her again. But the most famous ghost of Chillingham Castle was the Radiant Boy. His keening voice once terrified many an unsuspecting guest.
Radiant Boy appeared for a few hundred years, and we don't quite know who he was, but again, he appeared many, many times, and he would come out of a wall in what is now the Pink Room.
For 200 years, the ghostly figure of the Radiant Boy was an often witnessed presence. But at the turn of this century, the sightings would suddenly cease.
When they cleared out the chimney, that plasterwork fell out to reveal the bones of a child.
The child's identity remains a mystery. We only know that the lord of the manor chose his own ancestral chapel as the burial place for the bones. As for the haunting voice of the Radiant Boy, it was never heard again.
Well, now look, here we've got a plan of room 10.
The investigating team has gathered in a suite at the Bell Hotel. They're here to review the evidence and develop the best strategy for securing their ultimate objective: concrete evidence of a ghost.
Collins in the bed here, and sees a girl of about 13.
A special model has been prepared, accurate in every detail, to identify the best placement of cameras and sensors.
One or two things. The room goes cold, they hear some footsteps.
Yeah.
But in this particular case, they had 15...
Science can only detect what can be measured. But even if you can measure the presence of an apparition, does that make it real? Or are you measuring the effects of belief?
Did he believe in ghosts when...
No, he didn't. No, that's another interesting thing. Both he and his wife...
The search for a rational explanation means considering fraud, hallucination, and tricks of the mind.
It was just the interest. What was going to happen next?
15 different...
What was next?
Right.
In those moments between waking and sleeping, sometimes, for instance, people have a feeling that they're falling.
But how actually can you explain then the feeling of a sheet hitting your face, coming down, hitting your face, coming down, and then the feeling that the sheets are being tucked in?
I can't, except to say that's the interpretation that you put on the event, and I don't know whether that's actually happened.
No, what I'm saying is here, how can you explain the fact that sheets are tucked in underneath you?
So actually when you looked, you saw the sheets tightly tucked in.
You felt...
Strange behaviour for a ghost, isn't it? Well, there's no story.
The real difficulty is to understand what the investigation could possibly find a ghost to be.
They're as frightened of us as we are supposedly of them.
It used to be universally believed that the human spirit or soul survived bodily death. The idea is unscientific. The soul cannot be detected by instruments. But rationalism is not much comfort to survivors, and the idea of communication with the dead did not vanish in the 19th century, the age of science. It became a kind of underground cult called spiritualism. Spiritualists claim to offer direct communication with the dead, not as a system for regulating the living as happened in ancient cultures, but as a sentimental way of comforting the bereaved. Voices of the dead actually seem to speak out loud to gatherings of the living.
You were not talking to some disembodied spirit, you were talking to the spirit of your aunt, your father, your mother, your lost child.
In the golden age of spiritualism, it was widely accepted that certain people with special gifts could communicate with the dead. They were called mediums. Their most celebrated ritual was the séance. In the semi-darkness, hands were joined, minds were focused, and the bereaved waited for the moment when the medium became a channel for a spirit of the dead. In the gloom of the séance chamber, anything seemed possible. People saw visions of dead loved ones, tables lifted of their own accord. Yet for many spiritualists, all these strange manifestations were quite beside the point.
When people go to seances, most of the time what they are looking for is reassurance, and the kind of reassurance they're looking for is, first of all, that their loved ones have moved on to another plane of existence, and secondly, of course, that they, in their turn, will do the same.
This offered, naturally enough, a way for some people to gain power over others. Spiritualism led into the world of the occult, where power over spirits became power over the gullible and the desperate.
There was also a long occult tradition by which the spirits, demons, or whatever you call them, could be coerced into doing our will. We, as humans, could control them. But this was parallel, it was never part of the spiritualist movement.
In the early part of this century, one man's name became synonymous with the occult. His name was Aleister Crowley. He called himself the Beast. Only in his 20s, he became a leader in a mysterious organization dedicated to reviving ancient rituals and magic arts. But the so-called Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn proved too restrictive. He broke away to found his own secret society and learn the blackest of the evil arts. Crowley courted the darkest of all powers, seeking to penetrate the veil that separates the living from the dead. Rumors of drug abuse and perverse sexual practices swirled around him. Finally, his dark ambition drew him to the brink of madness. Denounced by the media as the wickedest man in the world, abandoned by both followers and friends, the beast died penniless in England. Meanwhile, more sober approaches to the world of magic and spiritualism were emerging. A group of well-known physicists, philosophers and psychologists founded the BSPR, the British Society for Psychical Research. They conducted the first genuinely scientific investigations of spiritualist and other paranormal claims. The magnesium flashes of their cameras revealed fakery where phantoms were once seen. And for the first time, the medium's own photographs were properly examined. What the images revealed was evidence not of spiritualist powers, but of double exposures and clear and deliberate fraud. The rationalist researchers of the BSPR debunked each and every medium they examined. But the hard-bitten skeptics of the BSPR did not dismiss all psychic phenomena. Even today, its members believe that some events remain unexplained.
We've got some new equipment this time, which should be interesting. We've got a thermal camera here, which we're going to put in the room, I think in that area there. It picks up differences in temperature. Put it on like this. Now, you can see if I pointed at Colin, you can see that he's got a red face. That's the heat. It'll come round to you like that, look, see? So it shows your temperature thing. What we'll do is we'll put it in the room. It'll pick out, doubtless, Colin if he's in the bed. And if there's a ghostly figure walking across, or an area that shows the difference in temperature, then we can concentrate upon that. Let's get these things laid out. Now what we want to do, you have one of these, and help me put this down. She walks that way, you put one down there, and we'll put one here.
What, trigger with movement?
Yes, that's right.
Right.
So if you walk through there, it'll set them off.
Right.
We've got a temperature gauge here. We've also got a sound. If she makes a creaking noise on the board, that light will come on. We'll put that up there, shall we?
Right.
We're facing there.
Okay.
So if there's any noise of the kind of that she's supposed to make on the floorboards, that light will go on.
Great.
Then we've got here, we've got the thermal camera. We've got the infrared camera here.
And that's facing the bed.
That's it, and that's on a time lapse.
Right.
And then we've got the thermal camera there that will show us any changes in temperature in the room. So we're pretty well all set. Shall we go in and look at the monitors now?
Brilliant.
Jolly good.
Okay.
Let's try it.
Let's see what we can see.
Jolly good.
The idea of spirits that walk the earth has a long history. So does the idea of spirits that mess about. Playful or trickster spirits are part of folklore all over the world, but now people feel uncomfortable with the idea of goblins or pixies. If this happens, perhaps it's caused by some power of the human mind. For Pixie, read Poltergeist. It sounds more researchable. In the late 1960s, two physicists from the Max Planck Institute for Plasma Physics in Munich studied an extraordinary series of physical phenomena that took place in the Bavarian town of Rosenheim. As this dramatized reenactment from Dutch television shows, the case quickly became sensationalized. Still, some of the facts do check out. A young German girl named Anne-Marie Schneider did begin a new job in a downtown office. And with her arrival, a series of strange and inexplicable events were reported. But did the lamp above her head really gyrate? Did the phones ring with an announcement that it was 5 o'clock, time for Anne-Marie to leave? And as the clock sped forward, did the place explode? Putting poltergeist reports to the test is never easy. While investigating, scientists concluded that the ordinary laws of physics couldn't account for the reported phenomena. The sensational nature of the case made it hard to separate the science from the fiction. Still, the events that took place in this ordinary terraced house in Enfield, England, were so well documented that a fair assessment may yet be possible. In 1977, Mrs. Peggy Hodgson, a single mother, lived with her 2 young daughters in this suburban house.
The case actually started when the mother called upstairs and she said, you know, go to sleep. And what happened was that the piece of furniture moved, and she actually saw it moved, and she pushed it back and it moved again. Well, from then onwards, of course, it was chaos.
Maurice Gross, then a new member of the British Society for Psychical Research, was called in to investigate the case.
I was certain in my own mind the case was genuine, and when I got there I was sure that it was. Small objects started to fly around, Lego bricks particularly. They called in a priest, they called in a medium, and eventually they called in the Daily Mirror.
The Daily Mirror sent in a young photographer named Graham Morris. At first, he was as convinced as Maurice Gross.
So I was dispatched with a reporter to the house. Things were just very, very quickly flying across the room. And I was watching each person in turn to see if they were doing anything. And they were just as horrified as I was. And still, there were things just taking off and flying across the room, people ducking, women screaming, men screaming. You know, everyone was horrified by what was going on.
The Enfield poltergeist became a sensation. But as newspapers across the country picked up the story, doubts began to arise in Morris's mind.
My belief in the whole case, I think, really changed over the time I was there. Things that were happening in the house the next day were in the paper. It turned it almost into a bit of a circus.
One of the most sensational elements of the case was the so-called levitation photograph, taken by Morris with a remote-controlled camera. It shows Janet in mid-air with her sister screaming. It was immediate front-page material.
Investigators were convinced this was levitation. Looked to me like a young girl jumping out of bed, but...
It's a very real phenomenon. There's no question about that at all. Anybody who says that it's by people's imaginations are talking rubbish.
I'm sorry, they still just look like a girl jumping out of bed to me.
The story took an even more bizarre turn when Gross claimed to have discovered a spirit voice speaking through Janet.
Come on, let me hear you say my name. That's not my name. Come on, my name's Morris. Let me hear you say it. Morris.
First of all, I thought it was discarnate voice, that is, coming from nowhere, but eventually I realised it was coming from the girl Janet. And when I challenged her, I said, Janet, that voice is coming from you. She says, oh, no, it's not. I said, if it's not coming from you, Janet, where's it coming from? And we taped her mouth completely up, and it still spoke.
I'm invisible, so much H-O-S-T. There was so much evidence from the actual person who claimed to be speaking through Janet that he did live in that house. He explained through the voice the manner of his death, and we knew that to be correct.
I had an hemorrhage, and I fell asleep, and I died in a chair in a corner downstairs.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing that kids like doing. It seemed like good fun to mimic and just please adults more than anything. If they get a bit of attention, that's fine. But it wasn't very convincing.
If anybody says to me they don't believe it, well, I say to them, well, that's your problem. It's not my problem. I've experienced it. It's happened to me. If you don't believe it, well, either try and find out something more about the subject or keep quiet.
Once more, the surveillance camera sweeps the room. The equipment seems to be working perfectly. It's very late. We're in the dead of night.
I tell you what is interesting, and that's the thermal camera there, see? It gives a totally different picture in many ways, a different slant on the problem we've got.
So if something goes very cold in the room, what should the colour be?
Well, supposing a ghost sucks the energy from the room
right.
to create itself, and it's colder than the surrounding area, which some people suggest.
Now Tony Cornell and company must wait and wonder.
Go across there.
Will the ghost appear? Can such an apparition be recorded? In many parts of the world, the passage from life to death is not imagined as a final journey. For the followers of Buddhism, it's merely a brief interruption in the unending cycle of birth, death, and rebirth that all living things must endure. According to the tenets of Tibetan Buddhism, we are all reincarnations of other beings. Moreover, Buddhists believe that past lives can be recalled. In countries where reincarnation is part of the culture, people often report memories of past lives. But one case in particular proved so remarkable that it caught the world's attention.
I think one of the most impressive cases on record is the case of Titu Singh, who was a little Indian boy, and when he was about 5 or 6, he talked about a past life as a man called Suresh Varma, and he could remember being shot and killed.
Titu's vivid memory of this violent event prompted a search for evidence to support his incredible claim. It was soon discovered that on the very day of his birth, a robbery had gone terribly wrong. In a warehouse just a few miles from the boy's birthplace, a panicking thief had opened fire on one of the workers. The gunman's victim, a man named Suresh Varma. He was killed by a single shot to the head. The boy's claim of reincarnation is said to be backed up by physical evidence. 2 birthmarks, one on the brow and one on the back of his head.
When the autopsy report is compared to the birthmarks on his head, it is found that the birthmarks on his head are exactly in the same position as the bullet wounds in the head of Suresh Varma. Not only that, but the wounds are slightly different in size, and they are exactly the same as the entry and the exit wound on the person he remembers. So physical marks are something that provide another degree of evidence above past life recall.
The parents of the murdered man have become frequent visitors to the home of Titu Singh. They're convinced that Titu Singh is the reincarnation of their dead son.
We need to open more people's minds to the possibility that we are more than just this body, that we should be thinking more about what will happen to us in the future. Reincarnation says we come back into other bodies over a series of lifetimes, and the purpose of that is to learn more lessons and evolve as beings. So whether the Tibetan Buddhists are right or the Hindus are right, or whether we're right, it doesn't really matter. I see it as a natural, universal law that will take effect regardless.
But right now I'd like your unconscious mind.
In the West, some people also believe they can explore past lives and former incarnations.
Your previous lifetime as Melissa.
Miles Austin is a hypnotist who uses past life regression as a therapeutic technique.
Well, they're showing me something that they're going to do to my hands.
Past life regression therapy is actually a fairly straightforward form of therapy where we regress someone or put them into a trance state and then very gently take them back to a previous
Being
life.
held back.
Carol Lawson used to suffer from a debilitating and mysterious affliction of her hands. After a series of failed remedies, she turned to regression therapy.
It's okay, now just step back.
We went back, we didn't quite know where we were going to go, we didn't know what we were going to find, we didn't know if it was going to work. And we eventually found this person called Melissa, and through a series of questions from Miles, we found that it was 1608.
Oh, they're taking me down these steps and I don't want to go.
Suddenly the breathing rate increased dramatically, facial muscles changed, and there was an enormous amount of movement with Carol's hands.
Ow, I've been caught. Ow, and it's pulling my hair.
It's okay.
But even now, when under hypnosis, Carol seems able to revisit a time of terrible torture. She's convinced these events really happened, but in a former life.
It was just intensely emotional and very, very powerful. Almost, I mean, it was a situation that sent shivers down my spine when I was actually going through it. But it was something that we had to go through. We had to change that memory and relax. And feel
Carol's descriptions of her former life cannot be verified. Her hands, however, are completely healed.
Can you describe more what it feels like?
And we've actually got nothing. What do you think?
Nothing on the monitors.
Nothing on the monitor.
What about the instruments? What about the temperature?
It's the following day. Tony Cornell and Judith Coney are comparing notes.
But there was nothing.
A careful review of the previous night's recordings has revealed no evidence of a ghost.
Why do I continue? Because there's something there that's got to be explained. And it's no good just saying it's a too difficult problem to deal with, because the human mind wants an answer to these things. So I keep plugging away. It's an unsolved mystery, and it's still a challenge.
The vast majority of societies have beliefs relating to life after death. So you could argue that because everybody seems to believe in it, except for the most technological, urbanized societies where everyone gets very rational and scientific about it, there must be some truth in it. Otherwise, why would there be all these beliefs?
I believe that it is something that can't be explained. It is something that is there at certain times. Maybe all of the time, but not in a physical form. There is no doubt in my mind whatsoever. It was a young girl, 12, 13 years of age, long white dress, garlands in her hair, and she was there. She was as real as a physical person.
Colin believes that he has encountered a presence that somehow had survived bodily death.
It was real, it was there. And I think I'll always say that. In my mind, it was there, it was real.
There are other people who believe that they themselves have lived after death and then returned to their dead bodies. There are cultures which seem to have explored the boundary between life and death very thoroughly. In the most literal sense, this seems to have been true in Haiti. Stories of zombies, the walking dead, are quite central to voodoo. They fascinated storytellers and movie makers, and they seem to be very firmly rooted in fact. Voodoo is a living religion much concerned with death, sometimes in unusual ways. This man's name is Clervius Narcisse. He was filmed by a BBC camera crew in Haiti in 1981. 19 years before, he'd been buried in this now empty grave. According to hospital records, he'd been declared dead on May 2nd, 1962. Years later, an amazed relative would discover him dazed and confused, working in an isolated village. Forensic experts from Scotland Yard examined the fingerprint evidence. Finally, the authorities announced their findings. Clervius Narcisse may have been buried, but he had never died. He was instead a zombie. The zombie phenomenon is clearly more than myth. American anthropologist Wade Davis has unlocked many of the secrets of voodoo.
By voodoo definition, a zombie is an individual who has had their soul stolen by sorcery, brought into the grave, somehow magically resuscitated from the grave in this passage of death, and then is reinvigorated by the magic of the sorcery to be led away to an uncertain fate, a fate that is almost always said to involve enslavement.
Davis has discovered that the voodoo priests have developed a poison capable of rendering a person paralyzed and, to all appearances, dead. A helpless victim can only watch in horror as the rituals of their own death and burial are performed.
If the chemical hypothesis is correct, he goes through a rather extraordinary experience. He's not poisoned. He's brought onto a state of apparent death. His metabolism goes low, he is paralyzed, and yet consciousness is retained.
Clervius Narcisse was buried alive. In the dead of night, a voodoo priest returned to the graveyard to revive and then enslave him. It was almost 20 years before his liberty was regained. A 1,000 miles from Haiti lives a songwriter and composer who has also come back from the dead. But her coma and resuscitation was organized by doctors, not voodoo priests. To protect her privacy, we'll call her Mary Williams. In 1990, doctors discovered a swollen arterial blood vessel, an aneurysm, deep within her brain. Only an extraordinary medical procedure, the hypothermic cardiac arrest operation, saved her life. To prepare her for surgery, Mary's core body temperature was lowered by 40 degrees. A cardiopulmonary bypass was performed. Her heart and her breathing ceased. The surgeon then opened up her cranium and drained the blood from her brain. There was no longer any detectable brainwave activity.
Our doctor gave us a very complete understanding that even though they were going to take my life, they did intend to put it back. So that's what they did. They stopped my heart, they drained my blood, they froze me. And this had the effect of shrinking the aneurysm, which is full of blood.
It's incredible because during that short period of time when the blood is drained out of the head, there's no heartbeat, no respiration, the body temperature is 58 degrees Fahrenheit.
Dr. Michael Sebom is a cardiologist, but his interest in Mary's case goes beyond the realm of medicine. Mary's recollections have reinforced his belief in what he'd once dismissed, near-death experiences.
Mary met all of the criteria necessary to declare a person dead. The only difference, obviously, between Mary and someone who's dead is that Mary came back.
The highly unusual thing that happened while I was having that procedure is I came out of the body. The minute I came out of the body, everything was wonderful. No pain, no heavy baggage to carry around, total freedom. It was wonderful. I realized that that was my dead body lying on the table, but it was okay. That was fine. If that's the way it was supposed to be, that was fine. The next thing that I was aware of was something began to pull me. And as I was being pulled, I distinctly heard my grandmother call me, and I immediately went to her. She was wearing light. Everyone that I was with was wearing light, as if it was clothing. It seemed to emanate from them. It was alive, and this light was all over everyone there. And I do remember thinking, I'm standing in the breath of God. And I ran into all kinds of people. I ran into two people I didn't even know had passed away on the other side. Most of them I was related to. They were family members, and I knew many of them. But there were many, many, many more that I did not know. They knew me. There was some kind of connection. They knew me. There came a time when I was to return to the body, and my uncle brought me back. And that was okay. I knew I was going back. That was all right. But when I got back and I looked at the body, I didn't want to get in it at all. It looked kind of like a train wreck, and I knew it was going to hurt a lot. And I had the sensation of being pushed, like whoosh, back into the body. Immediately, I felt like I'd been pushed into a pool full of ice water. I don't know what it means. What it means to me is, regardless of what caused it, it was a wonderful, healing experience that taught me that there is nothing at all to be fearful about in dying, the natural process of death. Regardless of where you sit on this issue, it doesn't matter, does not matter. For me, rising up out of that body and feeling that perfect peace and harmony with the entire world, being able to carry a goodly bit of that back with me. I can only say wonderful things about dying, wonderful things. Nothing to fear, nothing at all to fear.
We are a much more mysterious creature than we imagine. We really don't understand the nature of the universe in which we live. Strangely, if you look at the ancient texts, what they repeatedly say is that this life is the illusion, and the life beyond is the reality that we should come to know.
Is there life after death? Did human beings once really know truths about this that we have managed to forget? Science itself is a journey towards knowledge. Perhaps we are traveling towards the rediscovery of truths that were once taken for granted.